This is the pandemic, huh? All of us just hiding in our closets and basements. All right.
Look, I've been a freelancer all my life. I have worked out of my own solitary office, but I will say that this is a new and advanced form of isolation where kind of the whole week has become this kind of liquid moment that just doesn't seem to end in any way. It hasn't become The Shining yet. Not yet. No, but I will say that I now have the cleanest cellar in the neighborhood, which is saying something because we all have clean cellars now.
Welcome to The Well. I am Brandon Edgens. Anson Mount will be joining us directly. Our guest today is American author Jack Hitt. He's a contributing editor for Harper's Magazine, New York Times Magazine, and for This American Life. He's written for Wired, GQ, Rolling Stone, and we are very, very, very honored to have him join us again. 2 years since he was last on the show, where we made some predictions about how the next 2 years were going to be, and he's back with us today to, see how we did.
It's 2 years later, Jack, and how is your basement now?
Well, it's back to its usual clutter. So yeah, that was a brief moment of sort of like after a wild weekend, you end up cleaning up your room or something. And then the things kind of just degrade back to where they were. And that's, yeah, I'd say cellar wise, I'm back to, pre 2020. How about y'all?
Well, I don't have a cellar, so it's nothing changed. Anson, how is your organization?
Well, we had just moved to Connecticut, so we hadn't had time to develop any real clutter. And we're spending half our time in Toronto right now, so we've managed to keep it somewhat clean. But I'm remembering back to that moment of us recording. I cannot believe that was 2 years ago. Time has just done this weird skip jump thing. But I remember that, yeah, you were in your cellar, I was in my closet, and Brandon was in a different closet in my house because we were using two separate systems.
Yeah, well, this is a quick intro here. Today, we are pleased to have Jack Hitt back on the show, who sat down with us back in early April of 2020, to make some predictions about the emerging pandemic. And at the time, Jack posed this question in late March of 2020, when the worldwide death toll was around 150,000.
No crisis happens and life goes back to normal. If you look at New Orleans after Katrina, it didn't go back to being New Orleans pre-Katrina. If you look at America post 9/11, we did not go back to America pre 9/11. You absorb certain changes and you live with them. The question I want to ask is what are we going to adjust to after this?
That was over 2 years ago, and now the worldwide death toll is over 6.2 million. And we're going to play clips from 2 years ago and see what we got right, what we got wrong. And I wanted to get the most important issue out of the way first. And this is the first issue that came up that Jack brought up back in 2020. We'll deal with this one first.
It was toilet paper. What is our problem? That is disgusting. I expected it to be bullets, but no, not even bullets competed with the toilet paper hoarding that went on for that first 10 days. I don't know what that says about us. I await the cultural anthropologists to sort of paw through these preferences and make some sort of determination. But whatever the conclusion is, it ain't going to be pretty for Americans.
So, Jack, did you ever get to the bottom of this issue?
No, but I do know there's been a surge in bidet sales in America. So I I do remember that, like, there were sort of cultural aspects to what people hoarded around the world. Remember,
Right.
like the Italians hoarded pasta, and Greek people were hoarding feta cheese, and Spaniard chorizo. It was just sort of Europeans all went for food, things that comfort food, things that gave meaning to their life, and the fact that Americans went for toilet paper. It cannot be explicated. I don't think it's too horrible to even contemplate. But I will say, like, that's over, right? I mean, we're all back to normal levels of toilet paper consumption. Am I right?
I think so. And maybe, hopefully, we're maybe using less of it now. If what you said about the day uptake is true, then maybe we're less toilet paper now. I don't know. I haven't seen the sales. But it does bring up hygiene, which was kind of the first thing in everybody's mind, right? At least our minds, mm-hmm. it was toilet paper. And then everyone became obsessed with all kinds of hygiene.
What's going to happen to the handshake? I mean, would you shake someone's hand now on the street if I introduced you to them? You would not.
No.
You would not. And I think in some ways, as a culture, we are learning the real benefits of scrubbing in. I suspect, maybe we start bowing, or maybe we just do that like 6-foot dance that everybody does at the dog park around here.
Do you think that maybe touching your face will start to become socially unacceptable, sort of like picking your nose?
I wonder how it will affect like just the common cold. I'll bet a lot of those diseases are going to really decline now.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah, I have not had a cold or flu in over 2 years, my friend.
And I think they're like legitimately statistically down. The flu was not nearly what it usually was. I don't know the numbers, but yeah, I think we are kind of cleaner. Maybe that toilet paper did come in handy.
And the handshake, I very occasionally, if it's somebody who is close professionally, but even as I'm doing it, I question, should I have offered a handshake? Are they comfortable with it? Other than that, it's fist bumps and elbows, or just saying hi.
Totally. A family stopped by a couple of days ago. Their daughter had just graduated from Yale, and we all met in the yard and stood 6 feet apart, even though we're all vaccinated. No one has had any problems, but we just kind of nodded. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think in many circumstances, the handshake is at least dead for now. Maybe it'll come back. But every time there's one of these little surges, we all sort of like, I think our kind of instinct is just to go back to, okay, 6 feet, these are, not so much masking, but certainly staying outside, all that stuff. That's definitely been woven into the culture. My wife went to see another doctor in Boston a couple of days ago, and they both decided it would be best if they just ate outside. It's just not a thing that would have happened 5 years ago. You just wouldn't have a discussion about, why don't we eat outside as opposed to inside. It just wasn't part of the regular debate, But now it is. We folded that in.
I didn't think it would go on this long. I have this memory suddenly of when this first started to hit, my wife asking me, how long are we looking at here? And I said, at least I would say at least a couple of months. And she goes, a couple of months? What?
Little did we know. And now that every time there's a surge, there's one now, right, in certain parts of the country. They're not putting the masking mandates back on because that got so politicized and turned into huge, ugly politics. But all those other sort of instinctive things, staying away from people. When people invade your space, even get up within 3 or 4 feet, it can be unnerving. I've felt it. Have y'all? Do you find yourself staying away more or less from people?
It's lessened, I have to admit, for me. I just assume that part of this current uptick is being fueled by, for better or worse, people deciding that's it. We're going back to normal. I'm not going to do this anymore.
I think so too. Yeah.
I think if this strain had happened 2 years ago, it would be a blip.
That's interesting. Yeah, right.
I think the vaccine changed everything. I think once we finally got a vaccine and people started feeling like, that they were protected, and people were tired of it. And then I think it became a calculated risk that everyone decided to take. And then, of course, I don't even know how we even, undo this Gordian knot of the effects that politics had on all of this. And we'll get into it. But there's no end to that. There's nothing there has resolved in any satisfactory way. It just seems to get more and more knotted. But anyway, we'll get into that. But I think that for me personally, I have mostly gone back to doing things as I did. I will say that for mask wearing, I look around, and if more people are wearing masks, I wear a mask. And if no one's wearing a mask, I figure, what's the point?
Yeah, I guess I'm there too. I mean, part of it is that if you're vaccinated, I think my internal risk sort of measurement is if I do get it, everyone I know who's vaccinated and has gotten the disease has had this super mild case of it. So even if it's sort of like getting the flu, or getting a cold now for people who are vaccinated, if you look at the numbers, the unvaccinated, it's still a kind of a catastrophe in certain counties in the country, just because those people, when they get sick, they're being put on oxygen machines and, living in tents and that kind of stuff. It's, there is a division in how people are experiencing the disease between vaccinated and unvaccinated. Yeah, but I feel very safe going into a hardware store, talking to people. I might not shake their hand, but I'm not going to act like it's the Andromeda strain out there.
And that's the thing, that going back through and listening to this from 2 years ago, it was very interesting to revisit that moment of uncertainty when everything really came to a stop. And one of the first things that we noticed was how quiet it got.
We're the virus, really, right? And our retreat from the planet, just sitting still, right, has caused all of these massive beneficial side effects. Did you see that item that the pandas that in Hong Kong, they've been waiting for them to mate for 10 years. They haven't mated. And then they just did. And apparently the reason is because we just left them alone for 2 weeks. It's really this new quiet.
Literally, the Earth is less seismically active. That it's quieted down, which is no surprise, right? But then the fact that can register on a Richter scale is kind of amazing.
Right. I feel like that was such an interesting moment, and now that feels long, like a long time ago, because it does not feel quiet anymore. I feel like we've ramped back up, but we're making all the noise again.
But that 2 week of period for the pandas, it reminds me that there was this enormous impact also on marriages. Like I know that there were multiple divorces. Many divorces burst out because people were suddenly forced to spend 24 hours a day with their mate, and that proved to be just catastrophic. But for some of us, I mean, for me and Lisa, it was just like, well, we get to just play house more. We kind of had fun with it. We were alone together a lot, and we loved it. And I know plenty of other people who felt like their marriages just went into a much deeper and richer place because they were just kind of isolated. You're like having a sleepover for a really long time with someone you kind of liked. For a lot of other people, though, that wasn't the case. So I don't know what the numbers are, but there's a whole clot of divorces and a whole clot of sort of like reaffirmed marriages that you could probably measure and see that it did have an effect on family life.
Did it affect anything with you, Anson?
Oh, we're definitely the latter. It deepened and enriched our marriage, and as did the challenge of hosting other people. You and Sharon and a few others, and you guys were up there with us for about 5 months, and I think just having that little community there. And giving thanks over dinner every night and cooking together, it was a wonderful time. Yeah, we really. I'm gonna look back on that time with fondness.
Yeah, that was an incredible experience. I mean, as far as Sharon and I, we freelance from home. We've always lived kind of together in the same room, always. So that part of it wasn't different at all. But living up there with all of y'all, I felt. So it was great. I feel much closer to absolutely everybody but Anson. Now, the one thing that we had that changed was that this is a big one, was changes to our work habits.
How many people are working from home now, and after this is over in whatever form, will find themselves happy to still work at home, and their managers will want them to work at home? If it's 15% of the workforce decides not to commute, that has huge ripple effects down the road, right? In terms of, commuting, oil consumption, all that. There's a 4-day work week movement that came out of New Zealand that's been kind of sweeping a lot of these businesses. And I wonder if this is going to just speed up the process.
Do we know the status of that, Jack? Do you know?
Well, there's a subreddit called Anti-Work, and I happen to read it from time to time, and it's just full of these fights happening in these companies now. Some as big as Apple. They like staying at home. They think their productivity rates are fine, and like in some places that has been a fight. But in a lot of places, they've completely come to terms with the idea that you can work from home, as long as you have this defined set of tasks and defined set of job responsibilities, and you pull it off. There was some big company that just recently kind of just shrugged when 800 workers said they were going to quit if they couldn't work from home, and they did quit. And apparently, it turns out that it may have been a maneuver by the company to just get rid of them. So it's working both ways. I think we called that one right. It has totally changed the nature of the overall workforce, and people are much more comfortable living the way I take it the three of us do, which is that we work when we work, and the idea of reporting somewhere 9 to 5 does not exist.
Is the worker shortage still happening? Because we could see it in real time happening around us. Just seeing the people that we know in our area struggling to get workers, finding people ourselves, finding contractors that had time and people enough to come and do things on the house. Just we were left to just figure things out for ourselves, which is not entirely a bad thing, right? But yeah, you could really feel it.
When did the Great Resignation begin?
Well, it begins in the middle of the pandemic. And everyone says, and the economists who are studying it will say that the pandemic is what caused it, right? There were just people who suddenly realized they didn't have to go back to work. Some of the economists would say that with, the unemployment rate so low that it allows people to kind of bargain for, stay-at-home work, because there's just so few workers out there, especially in the service industry. If you want to fire a waiter, go right ahead, but you might never see another one.
Well, it's interesting because it started in the middle of the pandemic, but when the pandemic first started, we were saying things like this.
I've already seen people calling for parades for healthcare workers. That's such an interesting shift in priority. I'm seeing a lot of people value things very differently than they were just 3 or 4 weeks ago. guess who's not helping us right now? The 1%, the billionaires. Like, maybe our fascination and hero worship of those people will be revealed to be what it is, just kind of a scam.
No, I was in the grocery store the other day, and the guy ahead of me in the line turned to the cash register and thanked him for his service.
That seems to be, you can feel it there, right? This reevaluation of who is really important, and all the people that had all the money. Like, why are we working so hard to impress them? And are they really these job creators and everything that we were told that they are? And I think it exposed. Yeah, I think people realize their worth. What do you think?
In that clip, you were mentioning the hero worship of all of our healthcare workers, and I have to say, you certainly called it that went away. If anything, for a huge chunk of the country, healthcare workers became almost the enemy because they kept, arguing on behalf of taking these kind of safety precautions. I've been in some parts of the country where angry voters are convinced that the healthcare industrial complex was in some ways complicit in the perpetuation of the pandemic. The early on, you remember you would come down the road and see signs that say, we our heroes, the healthcare workers. That one didn't last. Healthcare workers have kind of like gone back to, I have 2 nurses in my family, and both of them are trying to get out of their own jobs now because they find it brutal. You care for a patient and they decline and die, and then the parents and then the relatives come in and scream at you as a murderer, you as the cause. That takes its toll. Abortion doctors might be used to being screamed at when they leave the building, but your average nurse, they're not. And especially, in the wake of being declared a hero and having, yellow ribbons tied to oak trees here and there.
Right. It was incredible how quickly we lost our patience.
And then gets transformed by this kind of weird conspiratorial QAnon culture that has gripped, 40% of the country. It gets transmogrified into this absolute kind of hate. That's also part of this pandemic.
Well, that I'm going to skip to this, which is exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
One of the big shifts is going to be how we, as a culture, use our various media platforms and outlets to understand what is really true from these experts. Our ability to shape the world around us to fit our prejudices is phenomenal. And probably not since the Middle Ages has there been a better time to mold reality into superstition.
Oh, wow.
That was, I think you nailed that one, Jack. That was... like you said, the proliferation of these conspiracy theories is the weirdest stuff that I just could not have imagined that came out of this. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, I think there is like I say, I think a third to 40% of the country now lives in a variety of separate realities that are pretty much separated from the mainstream. I mean, we have people running for Congress who will say, I think Elise Stefanik, who's a sitting member of Congress and one of the leaders of the Republican Party in Congress, said the other day that Democrats were a ring of pedophile groomers. Normally you get that from some edgy wackos, but that kind of alternate reality and that kind of conspiratorial thinking has slipped right into sitting members of Congress now. Or at least they think that rhetoric will work for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, the horses started to follow the cart in a sense that, what has allowed us as a species to gather together in groups as large as a nation is the ability to mythologize. You know, we are great apes, and before mythology, our groups were never as big as, say, 25, until we started figuring out, oh, we can have the same gods, or oh, we can have the same king, or oh, we can have the same city-state, oh, we can have the same country. And with that is always a figurehead or a flag or a leadership under which there's any number of things that fit into the column beneath that. But now the column has started talking back through a thing called social media. And so the figureheads aren't dictating what that column is or what needs to fit under the flag. They're trying to justify their positioning as leadership by reading the tea leaves of the scuttlebutt that's happening throughout this new form of communication. It's a whole re-reckoning, not just of how we communicate or how we are, what our vision of ourselves is. It's a much bigger thing than that. It is changing top down to, the pyramid standing on its head now.
Beautifully put. I mean, I totally agree. I am astonished by how often I am now finding myself talking to someone whose system of understanding the world is more mythological than kind of old school rational. We always had a certain percentage of people. We kind of love to talk to them and talk about them because it was usually, your grandpa or some odd person in your city. Now it's a lot of people. They have essentially unionized and formed an enormous chunk of the body politic, and are now out and about, and unashamed to say things that are crazy, right? That, Hillary Clinton sucks the blood of infants to get to the whatever that substance is that grants you immortality. But otherwise rational people are actually saying that in public. And a host of other things. That's the other weird thing about the mythological worlds now that surround us, is that there's a wide variety of them. And while they can sort of come together and form a single unit around election time, otherwise they're wildly divided and super differentiated. I'm working on a story right now for a magazine, and I'm sort of embedding myself with a militia group. And it's, they have, even inside the group, there's this, an array of thoughts and beliefs and faiths of how the mythological world that you're describing manifests itself. To me, it's a huge gulf trying to speak to them because I speak in this sort of old world way of looking for evidence, and it's kind of dull journalistic kind of semi-enlightenment practices, a practice of trying to come to a logical conclusion. It just seems kind of okay, boomer, that kind of thing. It's like very old school. It's like I'm wandering around with my Victrola.
Well, you said something in the I've lost the clip right now, but I've been thinking about it for the last 2 years. The way you phrased it was precisely, when people were coming up with, how did this virus happen? There's the basic scientific, we thought, agreed upon explanation, probably Wuhan wet markets, all that stuff that makes perfect logical sense. And then you said, no, nobody believes it unless it's turned into a James Bond plot. And I've been thinking about that for the last 2 years. People want, because a virus is random, people need to put some kind of control, insert the idea of control into all this randomness. And it's somehow more comforting to people to think, oh no, it wasn't just biology and nature doing its thing. It was designed. Somebody's in charge. somebody made this happen. And
you can't fool me, man.
Well, and of course that happened. The alternate theory did, explode on the scene about a year ago when there were suddenly these accusations that the labs in Wuhan, who were where they were trying to study this disease as it appeared, were in fact deliberately or accidentally letting the disease loose, or had invented the disease and then had either deliberately or accidentally let it go. That's all since been debunked, but it doesn't matter. There's now a good chunk of people who believe that it was in fact a Bond movie, that Dr. Evil, this kind of Mike Myers character, was somewhere, letting this disease go. And now those conspiracy theories, once they get out of the barn, there's no dialing it back anymore. There used to be some ways that you could sort of, in the media, you could sort of beat back a bad idea. Now they run riot and take root and either flourish or, die on their own. When the mainstream media tries to step in and, umpire, truth versus myth, they just get slapped aside or ignored, because there's no trust anymore in the body politic for journalists to be arbiters of anything other than rank hot takes,
right?
Opinions.
Fact checker has almost become a pejorative.
Right. Right. Exactly.
One of the things that we also talked about, I'm going to go through some of the more clearer predictions that we tried to make.
Okay.
One is this one right here.
And I understand now that the remaining drive-in movie theaters in the country are sold out. Like they're still operating.
That's great.
That's more 50s than I was anticipating.
Well, and don't forget elbow gloves. Those are coming back too. I mean, people are wearing gloves, but now they're thinking, well, I think I'll wear nice gloves. So that's also 1950s.
So Jack, did the 1950s come back?
Well, I guess I got that one really wrong.
I was about to say, I have not seen a pair of elbow gloves this entire time.
All right. And here's another one.
I think a newfound nervousness about being close to one another could lead to an emptying out of the cities.
The people who can't escape the disease, the people who have to work, they're stuck in these cities. I mean, some people can, afford to leave. And you're right. I mean, maybe, again, it doesn't have to be everybody. Even if it's 5 to 10% of a metropolitan area moves out to the suburbs, that's a massive, massive shift.
So what happened? How are our cities doing compared to? Did we experience a big drain and depopulation? I think Jack got it right by saying like those who could leave left, and those who couldn't. But did we experience a net drop in city populations?
I don't know, but the real estate market definitely shifted.
Yeah.
Yeah, the everything that was within a driving distance, a commutable driving distance of New York City, skyrocketed in value.
And that's still true, Anson. That's right. I mean, as I understand it, the wealthier towers in Manhattan are still unoccupied for the most part. Those people haven't really come back to the city to live. And I do know this because I'm married to a doctor who, of course, treats patients in hospitals. But like the people that they are treating and have been treating for the last year or two since we first spoke were largely people who lived in lower middle class housing where they couldn't avoid someone in their own house who might have the disease. Whereas I think middle class and wealthier people had it easy, where you could move out to places where it was you could comfortably still socialize and work without putting yourself at risk. Whereas people on the lower edge of the economic system definitely were at much greater risk, and that we got that right. How it whether it's permanently changed things. I mean, I think Anson, is right that like in New York, the real estate market has definitely been fundamentally altered. I don't know enough about like Cincinnati or San Francisco or LA to know if it had a similar effect. But, I live on the outermost, in New Haven, I live at the outermost edge of people who commute into New York. Right. And the property values there have skyrocketed since the pandemic started, and they still are super high.
Yeah, my business has changed a bit. Film and TV actors are less tied to New York and Los Angeles now, because so many of the auditions, I don't really audition that much anymore, so I'm not experiencing that. But from my understanding is that it is standard now to hold Zoom audition sessions. You're auditioning for something on camera. It's a camera, and the casting directors, producers have gotten used to it. And so people are now able to live where they want to live for the most part, unless you're doing theater, of course.
Well, speaking of theater, this was, Jack, this was your question to Anson back in 2020.
Hey, I wonder, Anson, do you think, theater began as an outdoor business. And I just wonder, like, maybe the Delacorte in Central Park will have a resurgence, sort of like the drive-in movie theaters.
The thousands of dollars to fly their family to New York to stay in Times Square and pay hundreds of dollars per ticket for theater anymore. It's done.
Is it done?
It's not done, but theater certainly took a hit. A lot of theaters went out of business. The big Broadway houses, I believe they're all still open. So that one definitely did not get right. That's a big red X.
Well, you also mentioned that there would be at least a temporary return back to Brechtian theater, where it would just be really stripped down and people returning to the basics and the roots. I think we skipped that.
Yeah. Wow, I was really going dystopian there. Huh?
I don't know. I think the Broadway audiences that are showing up, I think what it's shown us is just the strength of the bridge and tunnel crowd. I think the people that Anson was talking about, the people who flew in and spent hundreds of dollars and stayed in hotels next to Broadway shows, they're still not back. But I'd say that the strength of the bridge and tunnel crowd was probably underestimated all these years. I think they're the ones who brought Broadway back. I don't know if it's Manhattanites coming in there.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. As a Manhattanite, of course, I don't consider the bridge and tunnel crowd. Here's a prediction from Jack.
Uh-oh.
You said something on our phone call yesterday about this being something that might kickstart.
We may be moving out of oil. This might be the hinge moment where I think we're now at about 20% wind and solar. But, in 5 years, it may be a lot more.
It's hard to tell on that one.
I think we got that one right, except for the wrong reason. I mean, the pandemic may have started the shift out of oil somewhat, but really it's trying to screw Vladimir Putin that has really driven people out of oil. Did you see that last week, California, all of its energy was produced by sustainable sources?
Yes. Yeah, I saw that.
Right. And Germany has accelerated they were the ones dragging their feet in Europe. And now they've just decided, to hell with it. And they've cut off Russian oil and are moving just at breakneck speed to renewables. Unfortunately, for our predictions, it wasn't the pandemic that did that. It was this national unity or international unity to try to stop the war in Ukraine.
Right. The one thing Right. The thing we didn't predict, obviously, back in 2020 was Putin, threatening World War III. That threw a real wrench into everything, including our predictions about how the economy was going to recover, the speed of the recovery, especially the energy. It's very hard to tell. I will say that you said we were at about 20% in 2020. And it turns out we are still going at the predicted rate of adding a percentage of renewable energy per year. So 21% in 22. Sorry, and 22% in 21, and then 23% in 22. But it's still going up. But you're right; it's hard to tell right now. There's too much. The water is too muddy now. It feels like, in terms of
and just other factors other than the pandemic, just definitely took over. I mean, by cutting off Russian oil, it just drove up the price of fossil fuel. So all of a sudden, the high cost of solar and wind is competitive with fossil fuel, and that's going to allow people to shift over. If fossil fuel drops tomorrow, we'll just go back to using fossil fuel because that's how humans are. We're kind of despicable, really.
We're getting to that.
Yeah.
Now here's one of the latter predictions.
But who would get on a cruise ship now? I can't imagine any normal human who has lived through this is going to climb into the big petri dish of the Carnival Cruise Line.
But I think the Carnival Cruise Lines are going to be, these big cruise ships are probably finished. I agree with that.
Turns out
we got that way wrong. It's the lure of playing shuffleboard and drinking Mai Tais next to a casino slot machine is too great.
I just read up on that before we got on yesterday. Carnival announced it has relaunched its entire Carnival Cruise Line operations, as well as 80% of its Princess Cruise operations. Yeah, you're right. We got that one wrong.
We totally got that one wrong. I just talked to this guy, older guy. He has health problems. He goes, "Hey, he's my butcher. I just got back from a cruise, 10 days." I was like, I'm thinking this, you went on a cruise? You can barely breathe. You almost have emphysema. What are you doing going on a cruise? I wouldn't go on a cruise. I do think it's but there are other reasons why, remember cruises are where all of these diseases pop up. Legionnaire's disease happened on these cruises, all going all the way back. It is a giant petri dish. And sure, maybe it's safe right now because of the vaccine and everything else, but I don't know. I still wouldn't get on a cruise. But then I'm not a big fan of shuffleboard. So, It could be that too.
Yeah, I wasn't going to get on a cruise before the pandemic, so nothing changed. Now this was kind of funny. This is me making a prediction, and y'all, the answer is already built in. Y'all call this one.
I just read something somewhere, and I hope this is true. This might be a silver lining, that we may start listening to experts again.
I don't know. That's a big leap, Brandon.
Out of all the things that we've been talking about that could very well be science fiction, that's the one that is the most unbelievable. Listening to experts.
Y'all just laughed at me.
I think Anthony Fauci still has an entire security company working for his family.
Totally. Yeah, that one. That one is definitely that one's one for the books. That was way off.
That was way off. It got so much worse. And we're going to wrap it up here soon. And I have this little section here that I like to call, "Did we learn anything from this experience?" And this is one of Jack's, there's a lot of contradictory stuff in this little montage. You'll listen to it. You hear what I mean?
Coronavirus has made it hard for the conspiracy theorists because the virus is hard. It is a form of harsh, cold reality and doesn't really, you can't really maw the virus. I'm haunted by one of the first things that Brandon said, which is that, we'll probably just go back to the way things were, we're going to have to run this experiment 3 or 4 times before we get the essential meaning, right? And that probably is the case.
Half the country is going to say, "See, it was all hype. we didn't have to social distance and hunker down, not realizing that that's why it wasn't as bad as it could have been. So yes, it's true that we don't learn clearly demonstrated lessons very well.
And so, maybe by midsummer we'll have enough herd immunity that the disease will just start to peter out, and then of course we'll learn nothing from it, or we'll learn the wrong lesson from it and move forward and crank back up with our our rattled Earth surface.
Damn, Brandon, you called that one so good. We definitely. Oh man, wow. Yeah, I thought we would learn something, but the ability of the mythological crowd to maw this disease into it was nothing. We never had to wear masks. It was all an assault on our liberty. Wow, you definitely nailed that one. I could not have been more wrong.
Well, that was funny. I said that in the original recording. I said that after I was feeling smug about my. No. I got it backwards. In the original recording, I said that, and then I felt smug, and then I made my prediction about we're going to start listening to experts again, and then y'all laughed at me, and y'all were right. So,
well, there's all this talk of, we're better prepared now for the next one. Like, no, we're not. I mean, maybe we are right now. But these things happen about every 50 years on a global scale and about every century on a national scale. There's no way. I bet you people in 1920 said, we're better prepared now, and that lasted till probably about 1928. And so listen to me, future people listening to this podcast. Better get your shit together. If the year is 2119, you better get ready. PPE and, make sure you got land somewhere and some chickens, and it'll be all right. But we forget very quickly. I mean, this isn't this preparedness. It's not even going to last a generation. There's no way.
Oh, no. Yeah. And I think it could be much sooner than that. Not to get all global climate change again, but, these fractional degrees of climate change are allowing this fresh, kind of explosion of viruses that are traveling in new and interesting ways to new locations. And if you remember, there were all these diseases in Africa. And I remember finally when you get to that, they were very slow to transmit. And then they got to Ebola. If you remember, like once you got Ebola, you had like 48 hours before you just like macerated into your cells structure broke down and you turned into a puddle. There's a virus coming for us that would be aerosolized, far more deadly. And of course we will just cockily walk into it like, we had no trouble with the COVID. So this one won't be a problem either. And then we'll be looking at, 500 million people dead in 6 months or something. And then that might sober us up. But you know what? Probably not.
You're right. Yep. And I'd like to close on this theme of not learning anything from history. 2 years ago, Jack, you gave us a history lesson on Ignaz Semmelweis. Could you?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The hand washer guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you give us a brief overview of who he was and what happened to him?
So this is a lesson and an anecdote I learned from my wife, a doctor. But and I don't know exactly where Semmelweis was. I assume in Europe, but maybe America.
Hungary.
Thank you. But he noticed that women in the maternity ward were dying of a certain disease that he conjectured was coming from doctors who went straight from an operating room where they were operating on sick people and going right into childbirth and killing these people. So, and in those days, doctors wore their bloody gowns, and it was kind of I don't know if you played football in high school, but if you were the football player who had all those green streaks on your clothes, you were the one who got tackled the most, and it was kind of a badge of courage. Or if you went to a Southern college that forced you to wear gowns, if yours was torn up and covered in chalk marks, it was clear that you were really smart because you had lived in it for years, right? And so doctors had the same thing, which is that the bloody gown was their marker of, they had done all the real hard work. And so when Semmelweis came in and said, look, I want you to wash your hands and change your clothes before you go from one ward to the next, they were like, absolutely not. Anyway, he enforced it. He created a new rule, forced it on everybody in the hospital. They put wash stations near every, ward. And it completely altered the disease makeup of the hospital. Like all these diseases disappeared or went way down. And then after he got fired, they just went back to doing it the old way, and the diseases went back up, and no one gave it to him. We don't learn. Even experts, if you will not learn from history. We are really immune to reason.
and like you said, clearly demonstrated as well. Still doesn't matter.
Yes, solid proof that washing your hands worked for those doctors. And look, we all just agreed a few minutes ago that this washing of our hands and keeping ourselves just slightly cleaner than we used to has had this enormous impact on all these other diseases. Forget COVID for the minute, right? But colds and, flu and everything else. And yet we're going to forget that next year. Mm-hmm. I bet flu numbers and everything else will just be back to normal.
And it's not just forgetting, it's the hostility towards these people towards Semmelweis, for example. And this is where I want to close with what happened to him. So he was going crazy because he, had a breakthrough. It was clearly demonstrated and everyone hated it anyway. And so from the Wikipedia, he turned every conversation to the topic of childbed fever. He wrote letters to prominent European obstetricians that were, quote, highly polemical and superlatively offensive, denouncing his critics as irresponsible murderers and ignoramuses. He also called upon, had a meeting with where he basically had a convention of obstetricians where he would not let them leave the room until all have been converted to his theory. So he was an evangelist. He was extremely motivated by all of this, and he wasn't getting anywhere. Or there was a lot of resistance to him. So he began to drink and go a bit crazy. He began to suffer from nervous complaints. He spent progressively more time away from his family, sometimes with a prostitute. His wife noticed changes in his sexual behavior. And finally, this is kind of incredible. In 1865, Janos Balassa wrote a document referring Semmelweis to a mental institution. On the 30th of July, Ferdinand Ritter von Hebra lured him under the pretense of visiting one of Hebra's new institutes to a Viennese insane asylum, and Semmelweis surmised what was happening and tried to leave. He was severely beaten by guards, put in a straitjacket, confined to a darkened cell, and somewhere was injured and developed gangrene on his hand, and that's how he died.
Oh, wow. God. Anthony Fauci, you have been warned.
Wow.
That Jack, you stole my punchline. I was going to say Jack. I was going to say Fauci got off easy so far.
Well, I think that security detail that Anson mentioned, I think that might come in handy. It'll keep him out of the insane asylum at least. I mean, good God, I had no idea that was the ending of that story.
Yeah, I mean, they just didn't like it. He was persecuted and lured to an insane asylum where they said, hey, come check out our new asylum. It's really great. Gotcha.
And then they went back to killing babies with their dirty hands again.
Yes. And you know how old he was when he died?
No.
47.
What? Oh my God.
47. He went insane trying to talk to ignoramuses and imbeciles, and it cost him his entire life.
Wow. Well, I don't know if we're there yet, but it's certainly in some quarters. There are politicians who have called for Anthony Fauci to be executed.
Yes. Right. And I don't know what to make out of all of that. It's incredibly sad on one hand. And on the other hand, it feels like, well, it's just par for the course.
It kind of is. I'm sorry. We had so many optimistic and hopeful predictions in our original podcast. Lesson learned for me, and I think all of us, that in the future, I will just succumb to my normal dour pessimism and be absolutely correct in all of my predictions.
Oh, that sounds like a great place to end this one. Everyone, I hope you feel a lot better now. And please tune into The Well next time, where you will learn nothing.
We'll check back in another 2 years and see which of us is an insane asylum.
I know.
Yeah.
Right. I actually do want to do this again in 2 years and see, or do we need to? And do we have we learned from history and we just know that we can just replay this episode and it'll be accurate?
Well, let's just see how many of us are outside mental institutions in 2 years and see if we can reconvene. That's really the test.
Okay. Okay. So I guess we'll end this with like, who's going away? What are the odds? If there's three of us here, who's not going to make it? who's going away?
I don't know. After listening to how miserably I failed some of these predictions, I'm pretty much ready to commit myself.
if for nothing else than for the peace and quiet, right, Jack?
Oh, man. Well,
all right, guys.
This is great. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. All right. Thank you, Jack, for joining us. And
Yes.
And we'll do it again in 2 years if we're all still here.
Stay safe, you two.
All right, buddy. You too.
All right. Talk to you.
Bye-bye.
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 The Well is produced, recorded, and edited by Anson Mount and me, Brandon Edgens. Special thanks to our guest today, Jack Hitt, for pulling his truck over by the side of the road and chatting with us for a spell. It's just about the most southern thing he could have done. Theme music written by Jonathan Myberg and performed by me, Brandon Edgens.